Okay, so before I start this video, I want to clarify that this game is very early access. The game was released on January 19th and I'm recording this on January 25th, which means that anything I say in this video can be changed at literally any point in time on any day of the week. As a result of that, this video is going to be a lot more simplistic than my typical review videos where I analyze every little small detail. Palworld is a game that I saw for the first time a couple years ago, and although it looked really freaking cool, I immediately wrote it off because it just looked like another early access game that would get overhyped and then under-deliver. Paired with the fact that Nintendo just hates their fan base, I honestly never even thought we would reach this point. But against all odds, Palworld has somehow managed to make it into several million players' libraries in less than a week. And even though I was extremely skeptical, as I'm sure most other people were, this game absolutely delivers on everything I was hoping for. A very common consensus with Palworld is that it's simply just Pokemon with guns, which on the surface level is a fair analysis. However, it's actually a whole lot more than that. In reality, it draws inspiration from several other games and mashes all of their best ideas together to create what I unironically believe should be the new standard of the survival genre. To start, you have a handcrafted, massive, beautiful open world with tons of unique biomes to explore. To me personally, the environmental design seems to have taken a lot of inspiration from Elden Ring and Breath of the Wild, with its massive cliff faces, rundown churches, and sprawling forest. When it comes to pals, which are this game's version of creatures, if you will, they're very reminiscent of not only Pokemon in terms of design, but they're also very similar to the dinosaurs in Ark Survival Evolved in the sense that you can tame them, assign them to do tasks, and use them for combat. As a matter of fact, when it comes to forcing your pals to do slave labor and also base building, those two aspects of the game feel remarkably similar to something you would find in a colony sim like RimWorld. And the reason I say this is because your base serves as kind of a bastion, not only for your pals but also for you. The game is very heavily focused on automation for things like food, crafting, and building materials, pal spheres, etc. And in order for your pals to automate the processes in your base, you almost have to micromanage every little thing. First, you have to make sure that your pals won't get stressed out. In order to do that, you need to craft beds for them to sleep in. Now that they have beds, they need a food source, otherwise they'll starve, obviously, so now you have to set up a farm. In order to build the farm, first you need wood and stone, so you set up a logging site and a stone pit to farm wood and stone. But then, you realize that all of this is going to take a really long time to complete manually, so now you have to assign a whole bunch of different pals to complete these different tasks in order to run a successful operation. Basically, the point I'm trying to get at is that this game requires a surprising amount of micromanagement when it comes to bases and pals. And speaking of base building, it's pretty solid overall, but it could use some adjustments. The building system is pretty in-depth with tons of structures for you to use both for practical purposes and for decoration, but my main complaint is that actually building things is just really annoying. Unfortunately, there's no grid or snapping systems for when you're placing items on the ground or a floor, making it really annoying to line things up. Also, I think that the item overlap is way too strict, which can make it kind of frustrating to place several objects next to each other. If you like what you're seeing so far, consider hitting that like and subscribe, and I might even give you a really passionate kiss on the lips as I look into your eyes and tell you how much I love. Moving on, the game appears to take inspiration from Breath of the Wild once again with the movement and stamina systems in the form of climbing and gliding, as well as most actions draining stamina like melee attacks and dodging. And yes, I'm well aware that these things are not completely unique to Breath of the Wild, but I mean, let's be real for a second here, it's pretty obvious that's where they drew their inspiration from by just looking at and playing the game. In terms of content to complete, this is a survival game at its core, meaning that it's not going to be much different from Ark or Rust or The Forest when it comes to just basic gameplay in the form of punching trees, picking up rocks, building a house, and repeating. Also, the game follows the same generic tech tree progression system found in many survival games, with the max level being 50, and at each level you get a stat point which you can put into stamina, health, weight, etc. But there are, of course, unique ideas here that separate the game from the titles that I just recently mentioned. The biggest one being fighting and capturing pals, which, as I explained earlier, plays a very big role in this game. There's also dungeons, which I believe are procedurally generated once you're inside of them, but in the overworld they're set at fixed locations where they'll spawn and despawn at certain intervals. There's also camps that you can raid to save pals. And finally, you have boss fights in the form of mini-bosses, which just act kind of like fun little detours while you're leveling, and aren't much of a challenge at all, as well as tower bosses, which are more of a milestone that take a lot of time and preparation to complete, and are basically just really challenging gym leaders that require your absolute best pals to take them down. I'm very happy to say that throughout all my dozens of hours, my performance has been super smooth with the occasional frame drop every once in a while, where I would dip below 30 FPS for several seconds, but this typically happened in my base, so it could just be a case of too many pals working at once which caused the lag. For reference, I'm using a 6700 XT GPU with a 5600X CPU and 32GB of RAM. I'm also very happy to report that I haven't run into any major issues at all, with my only real complaint being that the AI can be really very stupid sometimes. So overall, it's very easy to see that they kind of just mashed together a bunch of ideas from other games, but they did it in a way that feels good. Having all the best aspects of these titles come together into one unified game creates a really unique experience that's honestly unlike anything I've ever played before. If you enjoy survival games, open world RPG games, or colony building games, you'll absolutely love Palworld. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.